All right, let's move on to the NFL again. Before we head for our take for 99, we are going to actually give some burning questions for the upcoming draft. Zach, I'm excited about this topic because there's a lot of storylines that is going on in the NFL draft at this very moment, but we get to choose. We could bring two each to the table and kind of dive into those burning questions that we have. And Zach, I'll keep it with you once more. The mic is yours.
All right, well, I'll start off with this, man. This draft is very interesting to me because I think from a pure offensive player standpoint, it's one of the best and deepest ones I could remember. There's a ton of really good quarterbacks. There's a ton of really good wide receivers. There's a ton of really good offensive tackles. And I don't know where you're going to hit with yours. I'm going to guess that, the quarterback position is going to come up. So I'm going to focus on the wide receivers here. And I have two teams in particular that I'm going to bring to the table, and it's two teams picking within the top five. The teams with the 4th pick and the 5th pick, the Cardinals and the Chargers. And let me say this: I'll start with the Cardinals. I think they're in a super fascinating spot because I feel pretty confident that the top 3 picks in this draft are going to be quarterbacks, and that leaves the Cardinals at number 4. And I think you could make a very intriguing case for them to possibly trade back. This is still a team that has some holes. It's only Jonathan Gannon's 2nd year. They played much better than I expected last year, especially towards the back end once Kyler Murray came back. And just looking at the roster, they got some good young players on this team. And I think they could be maybe even better than people expect going into next season. But I'm just wondering, do you trade back and pass down the opportunity of drafting Marvin Harrison Jr.? Because I've heard some crazy things about Harrison coming out of the draft, just like around league circles, like people saying, oh, he's the most overrated player in the draft. The fact that he didn't really participate in all the combine stuff, the workouts, like that's a concern for some people. But Will, I'm not going to overthink this, man. I think this guy is the best wide receiver in this draft. There was never a moment I watched college football last year, or really the year before that too, and said man, this guy isn't the best wide receiver in the sport. And I think he's the wide receiver equivalent to Peyton Manning, where just because of his last name, people are going to compare him to his dad and ask themselves could he be as good, even better than his dad? Nah, I think this guy could be a Hall of Fame player. And if the Cardinals do trade back, that could be something they regret for a long time. So I think they're in a super interesting spot. And I'll bring up one more point before I pass it over to you, man. Would a team like Buffalo be willing to trade up to number 4 and give up 2 first-round picks to go get this guy? Or are those days over, giving up multiple first-round picks for a non-quarterback? Because the last time we saw it was the Falcons trading up to draft Julio Jones. That's over a decade ago now. So I don't really know if that's something realistic, but I just thought since we hit on the Bills and wide receiver is a clear need, even if they stay at where they are late in the first round, they're probably going to draft a wide receiver. Would they be willing to go all in if Arizona was willing to trade back and try to get this guy?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually thought about this question too that you brought up specifically. Both, the Cardinals and the Chargers are in the same type of boat. So I actually thought about that. So I'm glad you brought that up. I don't gotta do it. But I think when you talk about the possibility of leveraging that pick for more assets to build around your team, because when you look at the Chargers and you look at the Cardinals, there's a clear need for bolstering the wide receiver skills position, right? But I think when you look at the Chargers, they have more holes that they have to fill. They have the defensive line that they want to add to, right? You have the defensive side of the ball. You have the offensive side of the ball.
Well, let me say this. I have some thoughts on the Chargers, and you could respond to them. But what do you think about the Cardinals, them specifically? They're gonna have the first crack at it.
I think with them, I think you take the best wide receiver in the class, which is Marvin Harrison Jr. I think if Kyler Murray is your guy and you believe in Kyler Murray, then it will show by you giving him another weapon, because you can go and try to build an explosive offense. So I think when you have Marvin Harrison there, you take that guy because you need him. You need to bolster the wide receiver position. But I think the Chargers situation is a little bit different, because I think if you're the Vikings, right, because you brought up teams that could potentially trade up. You brought up Buffalo. I'm going to bring up the Vikings. They have the number 11 pick, I believe, and they also have the 23rd pick. That could be lucrative for the Cardinals even as well, or the Chargers.
Right. If Minnesota
I'm trading
offers
down.
that, Like, if you're the Cardinals, could you turn that down? Getting 2 first-round picks back?
That would be a tough. Yeah, that would be tough to ignore that, to not accept that. And I actually think I saw a report where it would take a certain amount of first rounders. I saw that before I got on the air. The Cardinals camp saying that exact thing. So it will probably take a Vikings offer to jump in that spot. And if the offer is not multiple first rounders, then I do think we'll see Marvin Harrison going to Arizona. And with the Chargers, I think I want to talk about them more because I think they're more of a hit and go. Because you know, with a coach like Jim Harbaugh, we know his main priorities is establishing a ground attack, a physical attack, and playing good defense and having a more welded out roster, right? You look at some of his rosters, they haven't really had like alpha number one guys. It's been the quarterback like Colin Kaepernick playing with a Michael Crabtree, right? So, I'm kind of a little spotty with them that they will probably not opt to give Justin Herbert a rep. And even though they lost the services of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think with them, they will probably be the one to bait and accept a trade down from a team like the Vikings and try to, build a roster accordingly with those picks. And it may not even be wide receiver. So they're the ones that I'm looking at that I'm like, all right, I'll kind of be surprised if they take a wide receiver. I'm not gonna lie. Like I just don't see them doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting because on one hand, I think there's a chance Harbaugh would trade back and just collect as many assets as possible. Because also, I think it's important to remember, like, he just came out of the college game and he knows these players really well. I could see him saying, like, okay, I just want to stack up as many draft picks as possible and really start to revamp this rebuild. I've even heard they could take an offensive lineman too in that spot. But it's like, man, like I just feel like if the Chargers were to draft Malik Neighbors, let's say, if Harrison goes off the board at 4, I think there's a chance we could be talking about Justin Herbert and Malik Neighbors, that duo, as one of the best quarterback wide receiver duos in the game. And I think that could be something, along with Jim Harbaugh, that could really revamp this Chargers team and finally bring energy within this franchise. I was asking myself, if I'm Malik Neighbors, like, or just talking about Neighbors, like, which team would need him more, the Chargers or the Giants, who are going to be picking at 6? They've been rumored in talks for him. And I feel like Neighbors, if he were to go to the Giants, I think that would be a spot for him where he would put up sick numbers and he would become a star in this town of New York, kind of like Odell Beckham did. But I'm not really sure how much he would win or how much the Giants team would win. I feel like if he were to go to the Chargers, that would be a spot for him where his career could immediately
Yeah.
take off and really bring some energy within that franchise.
I understand the wide receiver position is something that normally in previous drafts you would want to attack in the later part of the first round, not the earlier part, not the top 10. However, if the Chargers were able to draft a Malik Neighbors or even a Marvin Harrison, either one, whoever falls, you got a lot of things that needs to happen at the top echelon of the draft to fall into place. But if they got one of those two wide receivers, it could be reminiscent of the Bengals drafting Jamar Chase with the 6th pick, I believe, and
Yep.
pairing him with Joe Burrow. And we saw how that offense immediately took off. They went from a non-playoff team that had only a couple wins to a team that every single year, when they were healthy, Joe Burrow, a playoff contending, Super Bowl contending team. So I think it will be similar to that if the Chargers were able to land one of those wide receivers that you're talking about, Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr.
I agree.
But I want to give you mine. My biggest burning question. I have two. I'm gonna start off with this one. What would the Bears do with their number 9 pick? It's funny because that was the biggest offseason question, was what they were going to do with the number 1 overall pick that dominated the headlines of sports talk radio. Are they going to keep Fields? Or are they going to draft Caleb Williams? But now we have our answer. However, they still have the number 9 pick, and they still can get a generational talent at that spot, along with Caleb Williams. So here's a scenario here. Do you move up and pull off a Texans where you take the quarterback and the available next best player? All right. Do you do the same thing by trading up and drafting Caleb Williams and taking Marvin Harrison Jr.? Do you dare do that? At that pick, do you add a pass rusher to go alongside Montez Sweat? Do you get an offensive lineman? There's so many options that they can, go and routes they can go. And I think Ryan Poles made it a little bit more suspenseful when he said that he's going to have a debate team, to decide what they're going to do. I mean, he even add insult to the suspense right there. And I think for me, the Bears are in a very great position. They've done an amazing job during free agency of building a great infrastructure for whomever they draft at number one. We assume it's going to be Caleb Williams, born at the aliens come and collect us all. It's going to be Caleb Williams. Okay. He's coming into already great situation with pass catches, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, with the tight end, Gerald Everett, to go alongside up and coming Colt Kmet, who's one of the premier, I would say, leapers of a tight end, right? You also got DeAndre Swift. So I think the Bears are in a very great spot where they don't need anything. Like, yeah, they obviously could add to the defensive side, but they don't have a necessity. They could easily take the best player available at number 9. And if that's Marvin Harrison, then it's Marvin Harrison. So imagine if what we talked about to start off, and I like how it coincides. Let's say the Chargers trade back and the Cardinals trade back, or one of them trade back, and they get one of those great wide receivers at 9. I'm pretty sure they're going to take him. And it reminds me in closing of the Dallas Cowboys situation of a couple years ago when they had Amari Cooper, when they had Michael Gallup, and CD just fell into the laps of Jerry Jones. And Jerry Jones was like, CD wasn't on my radar, but he fell to me. Hell yeah, I'm going to take that man. And that's exactly what he did. And I think in their situation, you knew Amari Cooper was probably going to move on eventually. So you already got your new number 1 in CD. And I think the same thing could be said with the Chargers and why they moved on from Keenan Allen. When they drafted Quentin Johnson, it was no accident. When they drafted Quentin Johnson, they knew they was getting rid of Keenan Allen because he was going to want a contract extension. So it was going to be Quentin Johnson. He's going to be the new number 1. Obviously, he had a terrible year, but still, they stuck with the plan. And I think in the Bears situation, Keenan Allen, he's going to want another extension. He's playing on a 1-year deal. He may be a 1-year rental. You get a guy like Marvin Harrison if he falls, if you trade up, or Malik Neighbors if he falls, or you trade up, and you give Caleb Williams another weapon. And already, Zach, I said this was a top 5 situation for a rookie quarterback coming into the situation. If you get one of those wide receivers to go alongside Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, that would go from top 5, arguably, to number 1.
So it's interesting. I don't know if they could trade up just because they don't have a second round pick in this year's draft. And you probably wouldn't want to move any future assets. But I do agree with your overall point that they have their pick of the litter. Like, I don't think there's one direction they necessarily have to go in. Now, what I'm wondering about this is there's a chance you brought up the Bengals example from a couple years ago. And I like that when I mentioned the Chargers. I think the Bears are in a similar spot. Like, they're trying to pair Caleb Williams with his Jamar Chase or with his Penei Sewell. And some of those guys, it might depend on like which one of those guys are available. But at the same time, the Bears, they could, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think it's on the table. Like, the first 8 picks of the draft could all be offensive players. And a defensive coach in Matt Eberflus could say, oh, I'll just leave with the best defensive player in this draft. And the guy I would be looking at is Texas nose tackle Byron Murphy. Very good run stuffer. I think he would fit very well in that Eberflus 3 technique. We know he's a guy that prioritizes defense. He's even said that going back to his days with the Colts, like, his favorite player he's ever coached was DeForest Buckner. I think Ryan Poles, the first free agent he tried to sign when he got to Chicago, was Larry Ogunjobi. Now, it didn't work out because of the physical, but we know this Bears team prioritizes defense, and maybe they go in that direction too. Like, if they could leave this draft with the best offensive player and the best defensive player, that's pretty appealing, right?
I mean, that's literally what the Texans did without trading up last year, So that, I think they're in a very good spot where they just take the best player. So whether that's defense, whether that's, I think they got their line situated, but even if it's the best offensive lineman, or the best wide receiver, I think they did enough work in the free agent market to sit back, relax, and allow the top 8 to work itself out, and they take the best play on the board. All right, Zach, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, so you kind of hinted at this earlier, but looking at teams that could trade up, and the Vikings are one that really comes to mind. But I'll say this, man. I'm still not necessarily convinced that the Patriots are going to take a quarterback with the number 3 pick. I think they're like, if let me put it this way: if I was Gerard Mayo and if I was running that team, I would not do it. I would trade back. I think if you draft a quarterback this year, whoever it is, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ.McCarthy, I think Bill Belichick left that situation so bare that whoever they draft would be put in an awful situation and they wouldn't be built to succeed. So I'm wondering like who could trade up. Minnesota is definitely a team that comes to mind, but the other team for me would be the Raiders and Antonio
Yeah.
Pierce. I could see them wanting to trade up to draft Jaden Daniels in particular, making a big splash. I think that when they decided to bring back Antonio Pierce, they must have had a concrete plan when it comes to the quarterback position. Now, originally, I thought that was bringing in Russell Wilson. That didn't end up happening. They landed on Gardner Minshew instead, which I like. I think that's a solid move. I think Gardner Minshew is better than a lot of people make him out to be, but that can't be their only plan. And Antonio Pierce actually coached Jaden Daniels at Arizona State. We got someone with a lot of words, big message over here.
Word.
But yeah, I think the Raiders are definitely a team to watch alongside Minnesota. And when you look at the quarterback dynamic at the top of the draft, I never remember a draft where we've had 3 or 4 straight quarterbacks go off the board right away, and I think that's definitely in play here.
Yeah, salute to whoever this is that left the message. You could DM me or leave. I'll respond to your comment after the show's over. But I want to go with mine. Matter of fact, I want to respond to you real quickly and let it segue into mine. I do think the Vikings and the Raiders make sense because I think when you talk about the musical chairs of the offseason and the free agent market and teams needing quarterbacks, right? So you had Atlanta that went after Kirk Cousins. They got their guy, and it's not really a short-term thing. Kirk Cousins is probably going to be a guy that's probably going to be there for about 4 years. So it brought them out of football purgatory as far as the quarterback position, because once you don't have a quarterback, you are in football purgatory. And teams were able to, Justin Fields and the Steelers, they got Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. They were able to go cheap and address their quarterback needs. You had other teams doing the same thing. And I think the Vikings and the Raiders were left with puzzling, moves that they made in the free agent market. Gardner Minshew, Raiders, Sam Darnold, the Vikings. And those are guys, obviously, that's just there to be a placeholder. You're going to need that quarterback, whether you start in week 1 or you bench him and ease him in, into the flow of the offense where he's starting eventually, whether it be a year later or during the season. We know that you need a quarterback. And I think there are the 2 likely teams that are probably going to move up, because you can't go in September with Sam Darnold as your quarterback number 1 without a contingent plan beyond that. Same thing with Gardner Minshew, without a contingent plan beyond that. Now, I know Gardner Minshew is not bad. He almost made the playoffs last year. He's relatively good, but you need a long-term transition plan for a franchise quarterback. And I definitely think those will be 2 likely candidates to move up to get their guy. And I think the Vikings will definitely, because they already moved up. So I think they have intentions on moving up further and landing in that top 6 to really get their guy, whether that's JJ.McCarthy, whether that's Michael Penix could be an option. I address the quarterback specifically more to close, because I think we should end off with that. But
well, before you get there, though, there's one more team I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if this is where you're going towards, and if you are, just feel free to jump right in. But do we know what the Broncos' plan is and Sean Payton?
that's another team.
Because, like, in an ideal world, you would say, like, oh, they would just move up to, I think Sean Payton really likes JJ.McCarthy, and if he had the opportunity to draft him, he would. But this team, they traded a lot for Russell Wilson. They traded a lot to go get Sean Payton, and unless I'm unaware, like, I don't think there's a guy in next year's class that is like Caleb Williams that would just be worth, not being good this year to go and get. I just don't know what their plan is. Is it just going to be Bo Nix? They're sitting at pick 14. Is it going to be a Michael Penix? I'm not sure, but I just haven't really heard really much of anything out of Denver, and I have no idea what Sean Payton is thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And what's their plan this year? Like, who's the Broncos quarterback?
That's what I was thinking in my head. I'm not even sure. I know what right now it's looking like. Jarrett Stidham. Didn't they sign Zappy, or Zappy's still in New England?
I think he's still in New England.
He's probably still in New England. I'm not even sure. But yeah, they definitely got to answer that relatively soon. Hopefully they get that nicked out in the draft. But one of those later guys, I'm gonna come back to the quarterbacks later to end. I want to give my slight last one because I think the quarterbacks some we going to both end off with just to close because that's probably going to be the biggest burning question. But my last one is you kind of hinted at it, the Patriots, and I'm gonna add the Giants here. Should the Giants and the Patriots draft a quarterback or a wide receiver in round one? I think when you look at their positions, is there a guy that they really like at quarterback, right? Is there a guy that they like? I want that guy, and he's going to be available to me because they could like Caleb Williams. Yeah, I like him too, but that don't mean I'm a draft. And the Bears got the number one overall pick, right? So is there a guy like Drake May, or if he falls, which he probably will, if Washington goes Jalen Daniels or vice versa, is there a guy that they like and they can get? That would be a number one question. But I think when you look at those two teams, it's two questions, and it's simple. A, is there a guy we like at quarterback? Or B, should we take a wide receiver because we don't have the ecosystem to develop that quarterback and give that quarterback proper support? Because I can see it being either way. Because when you talk about the quarterback clock, you're talking about 2 years of building your roster around that quarterback to really give him something to develop with. Then you're talking about an extra 2 years that you want to see him take off because after that fourth year, you got to make financial decisions. That's what happened with the Bears with Justin Fields. We ran out of time. We got the number one overall pick again. We're going to take a quarterback for sure. So that's why you see teams giving up on quarterbacks because there's a clock. So you have to make sure that you support that quarterback. Do we grab him, bench him, and use Jacoby Brissett as a guinea pig if you're New England? Okay, so we can get the roster built around our guy who we drafting. Same thing with Daniel Jones. Are we going to use him as a guinea pig? What if we like Marvin Harrison and he's available? What if we like Malik Neighbors and he's available? I think you have to answer these questions, especially with New England. I want to focus on them before I talk about the Giants here, because in New England's case, they have had a terrible history of drafting wide receivers. I mean, you look at it right now, since 2010, and no, my name is not Ben, they have drafted guys like Taylor Price for the price of a first round. Taylor Price, I don't even know who that guy is. He might got an Indeed account right now looking for a job at Amazon. Okay, you got Aaron Dobson. You got Josh Boyce. You got Malcolm Mitchell, Thornton. Okay, you got the famous guy of them all, N'Keal Harry, Mr. Bus on Mount Bussamore, N'Keal Harry. So I'm looking at New England. I understand that was with Bill Belichick, but I don't even trust this team to really draft a wide receiver. So do you take the best wide receiver who you know was going to be a good wide receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., where you think about the historical context here? Yeah, back in the heyday when Tom Brady was going up against Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison was the best player on the field outside of Peyton Manning. Well, you got his son, okay, who's going to be a generational prospect. You don't draft wide receivers well. Maybe you should take him and figure it out on the fly. Maybe you still can get a quarterback later on in the draft to develop after you put Jacoby as a placeholder. So, yeah, I'll leave us with that.
So I think it's an interesting point to bring up about them possibly drafting Harrison. I think it's on the table. I think the more likely option, though, and what I would do if I were them, would just trade back and just collect as many assets as possible. Because
one more point, Zach, I forgot to mention this point, but receivers don't want to come to Boston.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Calvin Ridley, his girlfriend was like, it's too cold in Boston. Stephon Diggs, I never want to come to Buffalo because it's too cold. What wide receivers, outside of Tom Brady being there because it's Tom Brady. That's why he's the GOAT, because guys was willing to play in the cold to play with Tom Brady. Ain't nobody going to want to come to New England. You better draft that guy.
Yeah, and I don't think the weather is the only reason, given the current state of the Patriots. But I will say, if they were to draft a quarterback at 3, I think it's easy to say, oh, we'll just play Jacoby Brissett the whole season, and he'll sit for a year, and he'll learn, and all that jazz. But it's we know how this would end, right? And I like Jacoby Brissett a lot. I once famously said if the Jets missed on Aaron Rodgers, that would be the guy I wanted them to bring in. But you could have whoever at quarterback. With this supporting cast around him, they're not winning anything. And what would happen is the Patriots would start 1-8 with Jacoby Brissett. And you know what the fans there are going to do, Will? They're going to call for JJ.Mccarthy to get in there and get snaps. They're going to call for Drake May or whoever they draft to go in there and get snaps. And I think that could seriously ruin their development in year one. because that's how bad the situation is there. I just think that this organization, this franchise, has to reset and realize, like, man, Bill Belichick, he really did us no favors. This is probably 1 to 53, the worst roster in the entire NFL, including probably the worst offensive line in the NFL right now. They have to collect as many assets as possible and really start rebuilding this thing. I would have no interest in drafting a quarterback if I were them. I would trade back, get as many draft picks as you can, but who knows if they're going to do that. I think this is a crucial decision for them at pick number 3.
And I think the Giants are in a tough spot as well because we know Daniel Jones. The Giants are kind of out on Daniel Jones. He's just there because he got a contract that they can't really get out of right now, in a situation that they can't really get out of. So that's why he's still there. But do you take a quarterback as well? Or do you take a wide receiver? You haven't had a guy that was a true alpha since Odell Beckham Jr. of a couple years ago. Do you draft Malik Neighbors and see what Daniel Jones could do with a top for a change, because he hasn't had that. We know Darren Waller. We don't know what this guy want to do. Do you want to retire or not, kid? Like what's going on, Darren Waller? You out here making rap videos and you don't even know if you want to come out of retirement or you want to retire. You don't know what the hell you want to do. Make up your mind, please. The draft is around the corner. New York got business that they got to handle. So you take those things in consideration. They might need more weapons. Wandell Robinson is not going to do the job, bro. I like Isaiah Hodgins. I actually like that kid. But
Hyatt too, right?
You got Hyatt as well. The sophomore is going to be a sophomore next year. You got that guy, the deep threat. You need another wide receiver as well, because if you draft a quarterback with a bad offensive line on top of that, with no weapons, I mean, what are you throwing him into? All right, fine. Daniel Jones is the guinea pig, but you already used him as a guinea pig last year. He got hurt. You gonna kill the man, okay? Then your guy gonna be out there. So
and they spent some good money on Drew Lock in the offseason, right?
Yeah, they did. They bought him as a backup quarterback as well. So you don't have to go to the rookie quarterback. I misspoke there because you do got Drew Lock. So you do have a contingent plan, which is smart. But you're gonna have 3 quarterbacks on the roster. Like, what are we doing here? What do the Giants really want to do right now? Brian Dable, I believe in the guy. I still think Brian Dable's a really good coach. I don't even think he's a bad coach at all. But there's gonna be answers that or questions they're gonna need answers. And I think what they do with that pick, whether it's trading back, whether it's using it on a quarterback or a wide receiver, it's a very important time as a Giant right now, especially when you're trying to build a very good roster that right now is not a very good roster.
So let me say this, Lil. If I'm a Giant fan, I would want them to draft a quarterback at number 6. And here's why. I do think that what you said is true about Daniel Jones. I think they're just about done with him. And I agree also what you said about Brian Dable, but here's the unfair business of the game of football in this situation in particular is, like, I think the pressure is kind of on Brian Dable and Joe Schoen a little bit based on how disappointing of a season they had last year and the fact just given where they are as a franchise right now. And even though I think we will both agree the Giants probably aren't winning anything this year, they have to show some signs of progress or show some reason to get you excited, because, man, I'll tell you what, with Bill Belichick out there on his couch, working to come back into the coaching scene next year, I think that would be something the Giants are seriously interested in. And if you're not going to win games, the next best thing would just be to show your owner, like, okay, I'm Brian Dable, the guy that won a playoff game with Daniel Jones my first year. We have a young quarterback we're grooming, and he's going to be the future of this franchise. And I'm going to do my best to develop him. This is also a big reason why I was a big advocate of them bringing Saquon Barkley back. And I think them deciding not to do that would be a pretty big mistake, because they needed to surround whoever their quarterback is with the best skill position players possible, something they don't have right now. And I just don't think there's a whole lot to be excited about on this roster. If they have another season of Daniel Jones or Drew Lock under center, like, that just does nothing for me. And I think there's actually a good chance that Brian Dable could be digging his own grave if they decide not to trade a quarterback, because we know this team isn't going to be very good this year. And if that's the case, I think there's a chance Brian Dable could be gone by season's end.
I mean, that's why if I'm them, I would look into taking a wide receiver or offensive tackle, because you do need weapons for the quarterback, even if it's an offensive tackle weapon, somebody that could block for the guy, because you lost Saquon Barkley, one of the best. Listen, this may be a hot take, and I'm not trying to open Pandora's box right now. I'm trying to stay the course, but Saquon Barkley might show that he's the best running back in the football where he's at with the Eagles because number one, they could block. They got one of the best offensive lines in football. They got weapons on the perimeter. He's probably going to be the best running back in football next year. I'm all over him in fantasy.
Mm.
Okay, he's going to show that. Why? Because he's in a good situation, right? And he's himself a talent. You lost a talent, right? Saquon Barkley, I don't think could have even reached his threshold because the situation with the line was terrible. Because he didn't have the explosive wide receivers on the perimeter, that's every down alpha males, alpha wide receivers, right? You missed that. So I think we're gonna see Saquon Barkley take off. And I think if you're the Giants and you're trying to build a roster, you need weapons for a quarterback. You cannot take one of these guys and think you're gonna have a contingency plan and then you just gonna, send off and take me there. You're gonna need some weapons there. And if Malik Neighbors is available, you take a guy like that and you give your future quarterback a weapon. You evaluate Daniel Jones and you give your guy a weapon because he's gonna need it, and we saw with Daniel Jones that pick kind of be like a failed pick. Like I've been back and forth with Daniel Jones. 1 minute I think he's a dude, and the next minute I think he's trash. It is what it is. But again, you took him over some other guys that ended up being good. Josh Allen. Okay. Do you know what guy you want? Is there a guy that you like? I want that guy. Because if it is, you take that guy. But if it's not, don't make the same mistake over again. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we're
All
good.
right. I would like to end this off here with this one, Zach. Since we talking about quarterbacks, I think it's obviously the biggest question. I want to know how many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round. That's my biggest question here, burning question, because obviously quarterback rules, and in a heavy quarterback draft, we are going to get a lot of quarterbacks obviously going. And a couple years ago, the Kenny Pickett draft, terrible class. Last year's class was a little better than that for sure. And obviously you got this year's class, and everybody's hyping up this class. And I'm pretty sure when you have a hyped up class, there are going to be some lower tier guys that's probably going to boom like a Lamar Jackson being the last pick, and we're gonna be like, oh shoot, we should have drafted that guy higher. Quick question before you address this take as a whole: is there a guy like that? Like a Lamar Jackson, where it's like, oh, he was the last pick of the draft, and now he's winning MVPs. Because there's a guy to me that I think could be in that category, and that's Michael Penix Jr. But I'll leave that question to you.
No, I agree. And it's funny. I think Penix is one of those guys like, and I know they won this game, which gave them the opportunity to play in the national championship game. But I remember, even talking about it on this show, like after that semifinal playoff game against Texas, I was like, man, this kid's going to be a top 10 pick. Like that was an all-time great performance. And then unfortunately, I think his stock lowered a bit because he wasn't very good in the national championship game against Michigan. But I agree. Like there are some executives that apparently that have said they think he's the second or third best quarterback in this draft. I think if you could get him, even late first round, early second round, I think that would be pretty good value. And of course, a lot of it's going to depend on the coach he goes to, the team he goes to, the situation in general. But nah, man, like he's a winner. Like he wins everywhere he goes. He transferred to Washington from Indiana. He was able to win at both schools, throws a beautiful deep ball. I think the
deep ball
concern
accuracy, like it stands out. The anticipation, it stands out, and those are intangibles you can't coach. You can't coach that.
Yeah, I mean the concern people have are one, the age, and two, the injury history. He's already torn 2 ACLs before he even gets into the league. That's not ideal, but I think sometimes those risks are worth taking if you're trying to hit a home run at that position. And I definitely think that's a guy worth doing it on, no doubt.
And there's, quarterbacks with different skill sets, like JJ.McCarthy. He may not have the strongest arm, but I think he has a good enough arm, can make the throws, even if it's not like Penix's arm. In Michigan, he wasn't asked to do a lot. So I think he's a mystery guy because he wasn't asked to do a lot. They were physical. Michigan, if you watched them, they were rushing the football. They played good defense, and then he made those throws over play action. I think in a situation where you have an offense running play action, and he can kind of sit for a year and he's into that offense, I think that would be a great situation for him. You got Bo Nix, who his processing and ability to go through progressions, that's his biggest strength. Then you got the top echelon guys like Drake May, Jaden Daniels, who potentially gonna go 2 and 3, and Caleb Williams. So I just want to know, after round one, how many quarterbacks are going to be off the board.
Well, what about in round one? I feel pretty confident that, Caleb obviously will be a first round pick. May will, Daniels will, McCarthy will. But if Denver passes on Knicks, like I could see him falling outside of the first round. So I feel confident that 4 go in the first round, and it might even be 5.
Yeah, is Bo Nix going to be another Will Levis that falls into the second round? And the Titans, I think, got a pretty decent quarterback. Yeah, I thought, Will Levis actually had a good year last year. So, I think those are the situations you kind of want to be in. I'm dependent on the team. The later you get drafted, the chances are you end up in a good situation. That's what happened to Lamar Jackson. And I think that can happen to Michael Penix. Imagine he goes to the Raiders and he gets drafted by the Raiders, and you pair Michael Penix with Devontae Adams. Already number one wide receiver, one of the best route runners in the league. That's a very good situation. Jacoby Myers is a solid number 2 as well. He's been proving that. He's very productive, whether it's New England, whether it's with Jimmy Garoppolo, whoever. He's productive. So, that'd be a good fit for Michael Penix. I would love to see him as a Raider. Actually, I would.
Yeah, I mean, one last point, I just think the Raiders are going to end up with one of these guys. Whether it's Daniels, whether they sit pat and get Penix, Antonio Pierce. I think when he took that job, Mark Davis wanted to hear what exactly his plan was at that position, because we know how important it is.
Please like and subscribe for all the up-to-date content. You've been slinging shows left and right, slinging content left and right. Please don't miss anything. If you do, like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a question, something you may want to answer, something you may have. All ideas are great ideas. Nothing's a dumb question.